Well, folks, since I'm off for Passover today, I thought that you might enjoy the full interview that I did with Malcolm Guite. He's basically a hobbit who is an expert on Lord of the Rings, like a real expert on pretty much everything Lord of the Rings. It's an awesome interview. It is really enjoyable, and it's a nice break. Reverend Dr. Malcolm Guite, welcome to the show. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you. I'll talk about talking to anyone. I'm an enthusiast.
I would have been able to tell that even if you had not told me, which I think is speaks for itself. So let's talk about the books. So I will be frank with you that I've only read sections of the books, which is rare for me since I've read a lot of books. And the reason for that is probably Tom Bombadil and the first 150 pages of Fellowship.
Oh, really? Oh, I've just been doing a reading of a bit about Tom Bombadil, but all I can say, if you haven't read it all, is lucky you have a great pleasure in store whenever that rich and golden time arrives when you can get really absorbed in it.
Well, I'm definitely going to start reading it with my kids right now. I have one who's 11 and one who's 8, and that's
my dad read The Hobbit to me, and then began The Lord of the Rings with me, and I carried it on. But you know, it's not only a glorious adventure, but you think you're escaping, you're getting away from the world, but actually at a deep level, you're being given just the kind of wisdom and insight and courage you need for when you go back into the world. You know?
So let's talk about the films and the books. Obviously, the vast majority of people at this point who are familiar with Lord of the Rings kind of in general popular culture are familiar with it because of the films and the spin-offs. Yep. So what are people missing if they've only seen the films, which are really terrific?
Okay. I think the films are great. I mean, the Lord of the Rings films are great. I wouldn't say the same about The Hobbit, but I definitely think the Lord of the Rings films are great. Partly because the images they took, they used Alan Lee and, I've forgotten his name, the other illustrator, Ted Naismith's illustrations that went right back and used them. So what are they missing? Well, the first thing is Tolkien was a linguist. He was a philologist. He loved languages. He cherished words. And in some ways, you might say the hidden hero of The Lord of the Rings is the English language itself. It's so beautifully used. It has such a range of registers. But you can see his understanding of philology and etymology and things just from the beauty of the names that he makes up. All the names are just right. You know, they work really well. I mean, even Hobbit, when he gives you the sort of literary history of that word, linguistics, it's Holbit. That's got the word hold in it. It's hole builders, you know. And, you know, Gandalf, there's something, Alf was the Anglo-Saxon word for elf. So the sort of kinship in some ways, although they're distinct. So first thing you'd be missing is the language itself. But the second thing you'd be missing, which is much more important in a way, is your own imagination, your internal imagery. In a way, when you open a book and you see all the little blank, you know, you can open a chapter called Lothlorien and you can see all these little bits of ink and patterns arranged. That's not Lothlorien. That's just the Lothlorien starter kit. He gives you certain words about the trees, about how Frodo felt as they crossed the river into that realm. He'd crossed a bridge in time. But what he's doing is evoking something in you. And, you know, great as Peter Jackson is, he's giving you his personal Peter Jackson director's cut. But your internal imagining of that book might be even better than Jackson. And even if it isn't, it's yours. I think, you know, when you imagine your Gandalf or your Elrond, or much, much more importantly, not only your Sam, but your Frodo, but also the darker characters, your idea of who Saruman is, or even Sauron himself. What you're doing is you're drawing on deeper images from inside yourself about good or evil, about a true path or a false one. And in a sense, it's much better to draw them up from within than to have them projected from without.
We'll get to more of this in a moment. First, I need to continue to take care of myself this year, even with work being insane. I can't skip the gym. I need to make sure that I'm actually present when I'm with the family. I have to stay on top of maintaining my health. When I was younger, I believed that I could do that with sheer determination and coffee. But experience taught me that achieving my best performance depends on proper nutrition, especially incorporating plenty of fruits and veggies into my diet. And here's the thing, I don't like fruits and veggies, so I'm very thankful to have Balance of Nature, which fits right into even the busiest of days. Imagine trying to eat 31 different fruits and veggies every day. That sounds miserable and time-consuming. With Balance of Nature fruits and veggies, there's never been a more convenient dietary supplement to ensure you get a wide variety of fruits and veggies daily. Balance of Nature takes the fruits and veggies, they freeze dry them, they turn them into a powder, and then they put them into a capsule. You take your fruit and veggie capsules every day, and your body knows precisely what to do with them. They're kosher, so it means I pop those right into the protein smoothies, and I'm good to go. Go to balanceofnature.com, use promo code Shapiro for 35% off your first order as a preferred customer, plus get a free bottle of fiber and spice. That's balanceofnature.com, promo code Shapiro, balanceofnature.com, promo code Shapiro. So let's talk about sort of the setting of Lord of the Rings as far as when Tolkien was writing them, because obviously he's drawing from ancient mythology and he's creating his own languages, but he's also drawing a lot from contemporary politics. And so...
he almost certainly started the first imaginings of that whole realm of Middle-earth and beyond it, the lands beyond the Sundering Seas and so on, while he was a young man on the Western Front. He and C.S. Lewis were both young officers on the Western Front. The attrition rate was absolutely terrible. We're incredibly lucky that both of them survived. And indeed, of course, Lewis was wounded. Now, one of the things that happened after that, if you look at some of the other writers who came out of that, the great war poets like Siegfried Sassoon and Wilfred Owen, they felt that the very idea of noble heroism, of chivalry, of the noble warrior had been blown to bits on the Western Front. Wilfred Owen came and wrote a very, very famous poem called Dulce et decorum est, which is a Latin thing, Dulce et decorum est pro patria more, it is sweet and proper to die for your country. And he wrote a pretty savagely ironic poem about that. And you can forgive him for doing so, given the kind of industrialization of carnage. But, and this is a really significant but, and that, of course, became the mainstream of modernist culture, the Siegfried Sassoons and the Wilfred Owens of this world. But Lewis and Tolkien saw just as much hideous action on the Western Front. But they came out and wrote stories in which it was still possible to have heroic courage. It was still possible for there, even in the midst of appalling odds and all the rest of it, for there to be human nobility, courage, but also compassion, comradeship. Do you know what I mean? So they salvaged. I think they were salvaging something. And for all the appalling, for all that was regrettable about that war, they still felt something human and heroic could come out of it. Now, in order to do that, they had to Tolkien had to invent a whole other realm. But of course, you see images. If you read, I think probably it's quite well captured in the films as well. But if you read when they're going through the dead marshes and there's all these ponds and pools and there's bodies kind of almost, and the gases from the corpses lighting fires on everything, that is straight out of, that is Tolkien, if you like to use a modern word, processing his war memories. So it's not that he shies back from, what Owen called war and the pity of war, but he doesn't allow the pity and the empathy to completely overrule the sense that there was, and there still is, heroic virtue and courage. And I think that's one of the most important things that came out of it. Obviously, he started in the war and then he was carrying on thinking these things through. The Hobbit came out in the 30s, in the interwar years. And of course, unbelievably for that generation, who'd already been through one world war, another one started brewing on the horizon. Now, both Tolkien and Lewis and some of their other friends were not going to be called up into the Second World War in a direct way, although in fact they did their thing. Lewis famously did these Christian broadcasts, and Lewis was taken out. When we think about the Battle of Britain, the last of the few, the last of the ones that has just died, he was 105, but Lewis was out there, speaking to them. So I think some of what was going on there went into their thinking, and indeed, since the Lord of the Rings didn't come out till the 50s, the post-war things. But here's a really important thing: they're not writing some kind of one-to-one political allegory. So a classic example of this is when the Lord of the Rings came out, and there's the idea of there's this one ring, but we can't use it. We can't use the enemy's weapon. It would change who we are. Not unnaturally, people thought this was a political allegory about the nuclear bomb and about, how do we defend civilization without becoming uncivilized ourselves? Now, that's always a good question. Socrates asked that question: how do you defend civilization? But Tolkien had a laugh about this and wrote, because he had already figured out the whole network of how the story of the ring works before we even knew about nuclear weapons. But here's a great thing if you want to think about how to read this in the different political circumstances we're in. So when Lewis reviewed The Lord of the Rings when it came out, he said a beautiful thing. He said, this is not allegory, but it's great myth written at such a deep level that it is, this is exactly Lewis's phrase, it is continuously suggestive of incipient allegories. So the story is so primal that when you read it, almost the story is wiser than you are. It's wiser than Tolkien is. He trusts the story. So the story keeps telling you certain things. It keeps suggesting ideas to you about how things are now. Now, I'm not a political animal, I have to say, so I don't particularly want to stray onto the extraordinary minefield of American or even my own politics. I'm pretty old-fashioned sort of. I'm happy to live in a constitutional monarchy because I'm a constitutional monarch. But here's a thing that Tolkien does in these stories, and this does come out in the films, so you get this. He often has, if you like, kind of connected but antithetical pairings of characters. And what he's doing is he's exploring the way a thing could be done well and the way the same thing could be abused, the way a person could flourish, or the way a person could be corrupted in themselves. So if you think about it, how do you be the kind advising wizard who actually has more power than the people he's advising but doesn't want to exploit them? Well, Gandalf is an example of that. But Saruman is the counter-example, and you kind of know that Gandalf could degrade into Saruman if he's not careful. There are various points where Gandalf could have had the ring, and he says, no, you know. So, but you think about it the same, the brothers, Boromir and Faramir. In the end, what is kingship? What is good and just rule? You have, I mean, the two persons who are contending for the kingship of Middle-earth are Aragorn, Strider, and Sauron. One is living in a highly defended castle, and the other has taken on the appearance of a wandering vagabond and walked along and his comrades and has shared the sufferings with the people. Those are two different pictures of leadership. Now, and even, I mean, you can take it further. If you think about Frodo and Gollum, you know, what is a good hobbit and how might a hobbit, and even in their hobbititude, as it were, become corrupted? And yet, you know, there's a little bit of the good side, you know, the Smeargol, Daergol, you know, thing. And there's something in I mean, there's a kind of bonding between those two characters. And of course, you know, probably one of the most deep, I think, moral lessons, I mean, lessons makes it sound too explicit, in that whole book is when Frodo, who's frightened, says, it's a pity Bilbo didn't stab Gollum while he had a chance. And Gandalf says, pity? It was pity that stayed his hand. The pity of Bilbo may come to rule the fault of many. And of course, in the end, Frodo gets as far, it's not plot spoiler if anyone hasn't seen it, but Frodo gets as far as he can, and almost against his own will, without, you know, for different motivations, but in the grand plot, you know, Gollum steps in and still has a part to play. So there's something extraordinary going on there. Now, Tolkien doesn't stop in the middle of his narrative and wag his finger at you and say, now I'm teaching you this lesson. And if you as a parent did that when you're reading it, that would be terrible. Just give them the story and let the story tell you. And I fell in love with this story when my dad started to read it to me. And then, you know, he sent me off to a boarding school in England, so he couldn't keep reading. So, and I hated this boarding school. I was very homesick. But I opened The Lord of the Rings, and suddenly I was in Lothlorien or Rivendell, or, you know, I could be there. And so I was about 16 when I went like full fanboy, totally into it, right? Now, I am 67. So I've had 51 years hearing Tolkien tell me this story over and over again. And at 67, I'm still drawing from it. I'm still finding stuff in it. I'm still being, now that's what great art is, you know. I've read a bunch of sword and sorcery books, but there's only so much swashbuckling and beheading monsters you can take. You know, you need something deeper, and there's way more deeper stuff there.
Tax season is now here, and the IRS is turning up the heat. With the April 15th deadline fast approaching, Now would be the time to act. If you've fallen behind on filing or you owe back taxes, delay will only make things worse. Every day you wait increases your risk and the consequences. With over 5,000 new tax liens filed every day and powerful enforcement tools like property seizures, bank levies, and wage garnishments at its disposal, the IRS is applying pressure at a level we have not seen in years. Do not make the mistake of facing the IRS alone. Tax Network USA is here to help you take control. Whether your tax issue is $10,000 or $10 million, their team of skilled attorneys and seasoned negotiators has resolved over $1 billion in tax debt using proven strategies. Your consultation is absolutely free. Do not wait for another letter or a surprise levy. Put a stop to the growing interest, penalties, and threats. Take back control of your finances. Call 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Shapiro. Tax season is here. Don't wait for April 15th to make a move. Beat the IRS to it. Call 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Shapiro. That's tnusa.com/Shapiro. Don't fight the IRS alone. Check them out. tnusa.com/Shapiro. Let's talk for a second about the stuff that didn't make it into the movies. Obviously, Tom Bombadil did not, but the biggest one that people talk about is the end of The Return of the King actually gets sliced out of the movie completely. The movie ends.
Yeah, the Scouring of the Shire.
Right, the Scouring of the Shire is not in the movie at all. So for folks who have not read the books, what is the Scouring of the Shire? Should it have been in the movie? What do you make of the creative decision there?
You got a very slight hint of it in the movie in Galadriel's mirror, when I forget whether in the movie, whether it's either Sam or Frodo, looks in and sees all kinds of bad things going on in the Shire. And in the book, it's Sam who looks in the mirror as well, which doesn't happen in the movie. And he suddenly sees that bad things are happening at home. And they're cutting the bad thing, one of the worst things you can possibly do from the Tolkien worldview is cut down trees unnecessarily. And Sam sees these people unnecessarily felling the trees on the Bywater Road. And instinctively wants to run home and sort it out. But then he realizes, no, his duty is here. And he has a great saying, he says, I'll go home by the long road or not at all. So anyway, just to tell you what happens in the book. Saruman and his odious, traitorous advisor, Grima Wormtongue, escaped from Orthanc, where they'd been holed up. And really just as an act of spite, Saruman goes to the Shire and manages to set himself up as some sort of proto-ruler and starts wantonly destroying. He basically kind of quasi-industrializes it. He introduces, but he also takes away the sort of freedoms of the hobbits, who are obviously all... the hobbits obviously live in a sort of fairly agrarian way. It's kind of like 3 acres and a cow, So he's trying to turn them into workers, and he has a set of things called gathering and sharing. And I mean, again, I don't think he's doing direct political allegory, but I think this may have been Tolkien's feeling about what was going on in communism, and particularly what Stalin was doing with the kulaks, with the peasants. And again, very presently for modern politics, as you know, Ukraine was originally and could still be, the breadbasket of Europe. But there was a point at which, whether it was the Germans or the Russians, it doesn't matter which particular odious set of people it was, were just basically starving the very people that produce the food. And there's a bit of that going on. So what happens is, even though they're outnumbered, the 4 hobbits, who you'd think would be entitled to a break after having just saved the whole of Middle-earth, have to come back. But in a way, they're more than enough. I won't say man enough. They're more than hobbit enough for the job by the time they get back. And there's a horn blown and various. So the Shire has a kind of uprising against a kind of, if you like, a kind of horrible piece of centralized economic planning by Saruman. And Saruman in the end is very justly stabbed by the person whom he has used as a traitor anyway, and so on. And he's nicknamed Sharky, and it happens in Bagshot Row, so then that's nicknamed Sharky's End. So there's a recovery and a restoration. Now, scouring is a really interesting word. I mean, I have a private theory about why it's called the Scouring of the Shire. There's a very great poem by G.K. Chesterton called The Ballad of the White Horse, which was about how King Alfred fought off the Danes and created the Kingdom of Wessex, and effectively what became England is really Alfred the Great. And Alfred the Great believed that Christians were the best people to look after not only Christian things, but pagan things as well. He actually, so in this, there's a final book of the Ballad of the White Horse. It's called The Scouring of the White Horse, and it's about cleaning off all the mold and grime that has grown over this beautiful ancient chalk carving on the hill. And so there are some political things there, but I think we should be very wary. I mean, I notice quite a lot of commentators on my, I have a YouTube where I read bits of The Lord of the Rings occasionally and other poems. And I notice quite a lot of political commentary on that, which I mostly stay out of. But one of the few cases where we know of a direct political statement at some, cost to himself from Tolkien comes in the 1930s. It was 38 or something like that, when somebody decided it'd be great to have a German translation of The Hobbit, right? So whoever the Nazi apparatchik that was dealing with, the licensing of books in that fascist state, writes this letter to Tolkien, literally trying to double check that he's fully Aryan, because he has a German name and they just want to know. And Tolkien, he writes a private letter to his publisher saying he's absolutely outraged by this. But then he writes, I took this out because I thought it might be amusing. So he writes this letter back to this hapless Nazi apparatchik, who says, "You're asking if I am Arish, i.e. Aryan." He says, "I'm not Aryan by extraction. I'm not Indo-Iranian. My ancestors spoke no Hindustani, Persian or Gypsy." And then he comes to the point. "But if I am to understand that you are inquiring whether I am of Jewish origin, I can only reply that I regret that I appear to have no ancestors of that gifted people." And so it's just kind of like, up yours. And he completely refused to have his book translated into German. He wrote a letter to his son Christopher. It's great. In which he says he calls Hitler that ruddy little ignoramus. And what he hated about him, this is before anything, was that Tolkien loved the Teutonic legends. He loved the great Germanic people legends. He loved the language. He loved all that Nordic stuff and the stuff that Wagner had written about and so on. And he saw Hitler as taking a kind of comic book version of that and perverting it further. And he thought Hitler was tainting these beautiful Nordic pagan legends that he wanted to draw on. And so what he did with them in The Lord of the Rings is a little bit better than what Hitler did with them in the Reichstag.
So my colleague Matt Walsh has been very critical of the movies, mainly along the lines of they're too long. And what I'm taking away from you is that they're definitely not long enough. And
no, like the first one where you're just going around Hobbiton, I love that long. Like I could have watched a whole movie of that. So no, they do get a bit longer as he goes along. I don't think the movies are too long. I mean, I could have done with more. Tom Bombadil is a whole other subject and he's very important. But by contrast, I think he totally misunderstood what The Hobbit was. The Hobbit is a little children's story and it could have been one great movie. So I don't know if you remember in the movie, this is in the book as well, in the movie The Lord of the Rings, when Gandalf is trying to figure out what effect, if anything, the ring has been having on Bilbo, he asks him how he feels. And Bilbo says in the book and the film, he says, I feel a bit thin and stretched out, like butter that's been spread over too much bread, which of course is exactly what the effect of the ring would be. So I saw a great meme one time where it's a scene, there's that scene in the film, and Bilbo is saying to Gandalf, "I feel sort of thin and stretched out, like a simple children's tale that's been spread thinly over 3 epic movies." Yes.
It's been a pleasure to have you here, especially to rebut my friend Matt Walsh.
Yeah, no, Matt, they're not long enough. But then, the book, you have a great pleasure in store for you, Ben. If your busy schedule ever allows it, use reading to your children as an excuse to get deep, deep into that book.
Well, I now know my plan for Friday night, so I really appreciate it, sir. Thank you for the time.
Okay, great. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, folks, hope you enjoyed that. We will also be releasing the full Critical Drinker interview about Lord of the Rings as well. So if you're looking for more of that kind of content, just let us know.